Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very powerful show coming up with not one, but two New York Times bestselling authors. Our first guest today is Brad Meltzer, and he's here to talk to us about his new book, I Am Harriet Tubman. Many of you know Brad for his New York Times bestselling books, The Inner Circle, The Book of Fate, and he's done tons of thriller books, but you might not know he also does a series of children's books, which are truly inspiring. So let's welcome Brad to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What a pleasure it is to have you here. You know, most people know you for your thriller books, and when I heard about your children's series, I couldn't wait to talk to you about this.
Yeah, no, I was, obviously, it's kind of funny because I always joke that in my regular spare time, I'm writing thrillers and murdering people, and then I get to actually write books for children, and doesn't that make sense? But yeah, this series came about. I was going to say this series came about because I was tired of looking and watching my own kids see reality TV show stars and people who are famous for being famous, and thinking that that's a hero. And I, tell them all the time that's fame, and being famous is very different than being a hero. But because of the kinds of thrillers I write that are, have a lot of history in them and research, and because of even the TV shows we've done on the History Channel and H2, I just said I have so many better heroes for them. And so we started with an illustrated children's book series. We started with I'm Amelia Earhart, and I am Abraham Lincoln. We did I'm Rosa Parks. My son loves sports, and I said, you want to see what a real hero is? I did I Am Jackie Robinson just for him. And then my daughter, I did I Am Lucille Ball for her because I wanted my daughter to have a female entertainment hero who wasn't just famous for being thin and pretty. That Lucy stands for the idea it's not just okay to be different, it's spectacular to be different. And she also loves our dog and animals, so I did I Am Jane Goodall for her to give her a scientist that loves animals that she could look up to. And my third child is my youngest, and he's my creator. He's the one who loves coloring and loves creating. And for him, I did I Am Jim Henson. And, I love that I got to do I Am Jim Henson for him, but it really started this entire series of I Am books, the Ordinary People Change the World series, and I love that people have kind of taken them one by one.
Well, there are parents around the world and grandparents that are just singing your praises because it's so nice to have, this book series that kids can relate to. It talks about real life situations that these ordinary people have gone through, and just it gives them hope that, hey, I can do more as an ordinary person. I don't have to be a princess or a Disneyland princess or, a celebrity, to make a difference.
That's exactly right. I feel like one of the things we pride ourselves on, if I told my daughter that Amelia Earhart flew across the Atlantic Ocean, my daughter says, big deal, Dad, everyone flies across the Atlantic. She's not impressed. But if I tell my daughter, and this is a true story, that when she was 7 years old, Amelia Earhart built a homemade roller coaster in her backyard. And she took a wooden crane, she put roller skating wheels on the bottom of it. She pushed it to the roof of her tool shed, and then she got on the top of the roof, got in the crate, and came flying down the side, flew through the air, crashes and gets up and is, all excited. Now, Amelia Earhart is alive again. She's not some black and white figure in a history book. Amelia Earhart's bold, and she's daring, and she's amazing. And that's what we really wanted to do with this series, is bring these heroes off their pedestals and off their statues and off the dollar bills of the world, and show kids that these heroes were just like them. And that's why in every single book, we always start with them when they're younger. You see them when they're kids, and they're always drawn like kids, because these aren't the stories of famous people. This is what we're all capable of on our very best days.
Well, and I love how you have the inspiration from childhood who plays throughout their lives.
Yeah, but again, it's the same for all of us, right? If I said to you, tell me about your childhood, you show me your childhood, I'll show you who you are. And to me, that's what's so important. And, when I was 5 years old, Jim Henson and Mr. Rogers on Sesame Street taught me that you could use your creativity to put good into this world. And if I'm doing anything with my life, I hope it's just that, trying to use my creativity to put good into this world. And an interesting thing happened when the election was approaching. And, we've been working on these books for a while now, but as the election approached last year for the presidency, something special happened. We started seeing certain books just take off. And it was I Am George Washington, and it was I Am Martin Luther King Jr. And it wasn't a Democrat or Republican thing, but it was that parents and grandparents on both sides were looking at TV every day and seeing politicians. And what they wanted to show their kids were leaders. We all know there's a big difference between a leader and a politician. And that's what they were doing. They were using our books to fight back and giving their kids lessons in decency and humility and working together and compassion. People think that we're a series of history books, and there have never been history books. They're books about values. It's why on the back of each one there's a value. On the back of I Am Amelia Earhart, it says, I know no bounds. On the back of I Am Abraham Lincoln, it says, I will speak my mind and speak for others. And on the back of I Am Jim Henson, it says, I will keep believing and keep pretending. And that's what I feel like America needs right now, is a return to those values of what made us great, rather than spending so much time fighting with each other and trying to take each other's heads off.
Well, and from what I understand, your book, I Am Martin Luther King Jr., didn't that sell out of its first printing, in no time?
It was crazy. I've been at this 20 years. I've never sold out a book at Amazon for a month. A month. You could not get the book through Amazon. It was the publisher told me it is, Brad, they said it is literally, truly on a slow boat from China. Right? It was just, it was they were printing new books because and we never saw anything like it. And that's what we're seeing now, that the series itself it's never been about, here's I Am Amelia Earhart, here's I Am Jackie Robinson, here's I Am Albert Einstein, or Gandhi or Sacagawea. It's that I love that people are using all of these books to build libraries of real heroes for their kids and their grandkids and their nieces and their nephews.
Take it from it. Yeah. Well, and so as you continue to write these books, as I know, I've got in my hands, I Am Harriet Tubman, which I felt that you really approached the issues of enslavement is so well that, kids can understand and see what was kind of going on during that period of time. When you write these books, is it based on, what you feel your children would be interested in? Is it kind of expanding beyond that? What's some of the more inspiration that's kind of driving the newer books?
For me, it's always the same. I look at the lessons that I want my kids to have. And let's talk about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, of course, is enslaved. And that's a big issue for kids, right? It's really hard to understand, the consequences, but we always start again when they're little. And what you find out is when she was a little girl, that Harriet Tubman, her father taught her what the North Star was, and explained that the North Star, you follow the North Star, it'll always lead you in the right direction. And of course, he meant literally, because back then, going north is how you got free. If you were in the South, you were enslaved. If you went north, you were free. And it was a point in time where Harriet Tubman and her brothers decide we need to escape, right? They're going to split apart our family, sell us to a new owner. We need to escape. And they make a plan, Harriet and her brothers. And it's her brothers who actually get scared and decide to stay. It's Harriet Tubman, the young girl, who is the one who's brave enough to leave. And I need my daughter to hear that lesson. I need my sons to hear that lesson, to see that powerful young woman. And for me, when she's finally free, that's the moment. That's it. She's got that's the dream. Be free. She gets a job. She can have her life. She never needs to look back. But instead, Harriet Tubman does exactly that and looks back and says there are so many other people who need my help too. And of course, explains the Underground Railroad and goes back and helps all these other people escape enslavement. And the Underground Railroad, especially to explain to kids, it's not a real railroad. It doesn't have tracks, but it does have conductors. It does have stops. It's a network of people who are against slavery, trying to help people who want to get out of slavery. And the amazing part is all these people are working together. And eventually, what I love about the book, and it's the most important part of the book, it says in all of our lives, we're going to face hard decisions. And the question is, what do you do with that? Would you stand up to someone who's strong in order to help someone who's weak? Would you stand up to someone who's mighty to help someone who needs it? And to me, how you answer that question decides who we are as people. And if you want to answer that question, you have to follow your heart, which is your own North Star. It will always lead you in the right direction. And I need my daughter and my sons to hear that lesson and to know that they have to look out for other people. That's the lesson of Harriet Tubman.
We need all of our daughters and sons to, read your books because of the values that it gives and just that moral compass that, it's not telling people what to do, but it's giving them, pause to kind of think, gosh, in this situation, how would you handle yourself? What would you do?
Listen, we look around right now. We got a world full of bullies. We have a world full of people who, are trying to push everyone around. And I want my kids to know what you do to a bully. I want my kids to know, more important, how to treat other people. That we don't just turn away when people need help, right? And that's not just something that comes. It has to be taught, and it's not inherent. It's not in schools. It's our responsibility as parents and grandparents and uncles and aunts to make sure we put the right lessons out there. And these are not, the best part of this series, what I love, is that it's not a political thing. This is not a Democrat or Republican thing. I go from, an NPR affiliate to Fox News, and everybody agrees. It's the one thing we all agree on is you got it, and sometimes obviously some sides treat people better than other sides, but the truth is we all can agree that we need to show people who need help, you got to put a hand and help them. When someone is, in danger, you got to help them. And as it says in I Am Harriet Tubman, it says in life, sometimes we're like birds, and sometimes we fly high above the clouds, and sometimes we fall. But when you do fly really high and you get above the clouds, you have a choice. You can stay up there and enjoy the view. It's great. Have a great time. Or you can turn around and reach back down and bring others up to join you. And to me, that's a vital lesson, right? Is that when people need help, you got to bring them up and help them. Not everyone, everyone thinks that everyone's equal. Some people are born on third base and they think they hit a triple. And it is not an equal race in this world. And I think sometimes we need to remind our kids that when someone needs help, we do want to show the compassion to help them.
I think our world can use a lot more compassion, so I would agree with you on that, because when we look at the different shootings that are happening at some of the schools and just children being despondent, there's a bigger story that goes with all of that as well. So,
and listen, that's how you teach those kids to be heroes, right? I mean, those kids in Parkland are heroes.
Yeah. It's a tough deal. I know you've got another book that's coming out pretty soon that we have to look forward to, and it's I Am Neil Armstrong. And so, how did that come about as far as inspiration for Neil?
Well, it's funny. Our secret weapon for these books is not my writing; it's our artist, Chris Eliopoulos. And if you've seen the books, Chris has an art style that, I learned this. I want my kids off their phones. I want my kids off their screens and their computers. But the only way you're ever going to have that happen is you got to give them something better to look at. That's it. If it's not better, they don't care. And so that's why I hired Chris. And what Chris's art style is a cross between Charlie Brown meets Calvin and Hobbes. It's adorable. And kids love it. And that's why they fall in love with Rosa Parks and Amelia Earhart and Jane Goodall and a little Gandhi and a Martin Luther King Jr. and Jackie Robinson and Abraham Lincoln, is because Chris draws them in a way that kids love. And one of the things that Chris always wanted from the very start is he always wanted to do I Am Neil Armstrong. He wanted to actually do, when we launched the book series with Amelia Earhart and Abraham Lincoln, Chris wanted to launch it with Neil Armstrong. And I was like, no offense to Neil Armstrong. And I'm talking to you from Ohio right now, so no offense to Neil Armstrong. But I can tell you that I was like, we got to do Abraham Lincoln first. And so here we are. We're finally doing Neil Armstrong. And Chris just drew. He loves it so much. Every rivet on every rocket. And what was thrilling to me is when we sent it to friends who used to work at NASA, we wanted to have them proof the book for us. My buddy wrote back and he said, you guys are such nerds, because we just got so nerdy. We had so much fun with it, and I can't wait to share the lessons of Neil Armstrong, who was a man who, is not about just hard work and about teamwork, Also, of course, about, the importance of taking a first step and being brave. But also, I think just so important to remember to be humble. To remember when being humble was a good thing, when something that we promoted, especially in our leaders. And I want my kids to learn that lesson, because every time I tuck my kids into bed at night, I say 3 things to them. Dream big, work hard, stay humble. And Neil Armstrong helps me with the stay humble part.
He's great inspiration for that, without a doubt. When you were writing these books, and on your end, because we know we've got Chris doing the lovely illustrations, did you do much research for it? Because it just seems that you have done so well in just grabbing that character that the kids can really focus and be attracted to.
No, of course. Listen, you can't just write this off the top of your head. I don't care if it's a kid's book. Our responsibility is to do our best to get it right. And so when we do our books, we always go and we try to find the best experts in the field to also make sure we're getting it right. So when we did, just as an example, I Am Martin Luther King Jr., we had Representative John Lewis read the book for us. He was there with Dr. King. When we did I Am Jim Henson, we had Jim Henson's daughters read the book and send us photos of their family's house so we could match it. When we did I Am Gandhi, we did, one of the Canadian Gandhi organizations in the world helped us proof it. And when we did I Am Jane Goodall herself read the book for us to make sure we got her life story right. Right? I mean, when I do I Am George Washington, if I get it wrong, George Washington isn't really upset. But if I get I Am Jane Goodall wrong, Jane Goodall can come to my house with chimpanzees. I don't want to mess that up.
Yeah,
but it was nice.
You got to be on your P's and Q's on that one.
Yeah, so when it came time Harriet Tubman, we found, I just truly went and looked for the best Harriet Tubman biographies that were out there for adults, and the ones that I thought were the best, I actually sent to the author, and I said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm doing this for, people buy them as baby gifts, but obviously 5, 6, 10, 12, 13-year-olds, I need to get it right. And she went through with a fine-tooth comb and made sure that every detail was as best we can, to be figured out to be right. And to me, it's important, because if we don't do that, all we're teaching our kids are myths. And then we're not being fair to the kids. They're not going to learn anything real if we lie to them. But you get it right, you tell the true story, and now you get them hooked for life.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure there are many adults that are hooked by your books as well.
No, we sell more. We sell more I Am Lucille Balls, I think, to adults than we do to kids, but that's okay, too.
Well, there really is no age limit on your books. They are timeless, so. Well, Brad, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn about all the books that you sell?
Sure, I appreciate that. My name, you can just go to brad-meltzer.com. It's like seltzer that you drink, but with an M like Mary. So you can find me also on Twitter at brad-meltzer or facebook.com/brad-meltzer. I'm all over the place. And if you go to the website, if you go to brad-meltzer.com or ordinarypeoplechangetheworld.com, you'll see all the hero books. And we have a lot of fun. When you see them all together, you'll realize just the power of what these messages are.
Without a doubt. I've joined your community. I know it's called the Invisible Army, so I've signed up for that and highly suggest that our listeners do the same, and they can see you at many different locations for events and also learn more about the great books that you're writing, both in the thriller and mystery section as well as children's. So, Brad, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Do you know that you can become a genius at any age? Do you know that you can change your life and create a brilliant life for yourself? Hi, I am Olympia LaPointe, an award-winning rocket scientist who you more than likely have seen on TED Talks, Impact Theory, and PBS. Check out my latest book, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. Simply go to answersunleashed.com books and check it out for yourself. You'll find the tools to help you create the life you've always wanted.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted to be introducing our next guest, Mary-Pilon, and she's here today to talk to us about her new book, The Kevin Show. So Mary is an author of the New York Times bestseller, The Monopolist, and she's a regular contributor to The New Yorker, Esquire, Fast Magazine, MSNBC, Vice, Politico, and many more. She's such an amazing writer. So I'm so delighted that she's going to be here for us today to talk to us about her new book, The Kevin Show. So welcome to the show, Mary.
Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to have you here, and my goodness, what a profound book. Oh, thank you. It was a profound reporting experience as well. I can only imagine, and of course you shared it with us, so we're so grateful for that. And, before we get a little bit too ahead of ourselves here, I would love to hear what just got you on the path of writing. Have you been doing this since you could write? Oh, gosh. Yes, absolutely. I always loved books. Basically when I was walking, I was reading as much as I could. I grew up in Oregon, so it was cold and rainy, so we had a lot of indoor time. I was fortunate in that I had, a mom who took me to the library all the time. So I always knew I loved stories. I always knew that I loved writing. And when I went to college, I didn't come from a family of writers, so the idea of doing it for a living wasn't even really on my radar. It just seemed kind of like a fake job, and part of me still thinks it is. And when I went to school, I really thought, I knew I wanted to keep writing, and I was interning in journalism, but I really thought I was going to be a lawyer, because that's what, if you had a certain GPA and you went to an ambitious school, that's what everybody did. And I realized that I was having too much fun writing, and thought, well, I'll try this for a bit, and then, it's been a decade, and I haven't even touched the LSAT. So this all seems like this crazy tangent to make sure I don't go to law school, and I, respect lawyers immensely, and, I have a lot of friends who've done that, but I don't think that ultimately would have been the right path for me personally. Yeah, well, hey, we're so glad that you are pursuing writing, because you've got this great book, The Kevin Show. You contribute to a lot of really great and well-known magazines and just different media sources. Yeah, it's been a blast. I think that whether it's a big story or a small story, every day that goes by, and it sounds really cheesy, but it does feel like you just feel so grateful for the opportunity. And I think, particularly now, I think a lot about how best do you use those skills. I've always been really interested in public service journalism and investigative work, partially because of that. How do you
tell stories that really, really matter and can have high impact. And I think particularly in this political climate, a lot of journalists are asking themselves that as well. And, it's funny because my mother when I was growing up, my mother worked as a psychologist and was involved in a lot of poor rural communities doing family counseling. And I, of course, did that thing where when I went off to college, I said, I'm never going to be a psychologist. I'm not going to take a single psychology class. I'm not going to write about it. And then I realized, a few years into my career working out of school, oh my gosh, I just get paid to listen to people talk about problems and write about it and try to find patterns in human behavior. And I'm constantly looking at people and talking to them. And so, by the time the Kevin Show reporting came up, I thought, okay, a lot of these terms around psychology weren't totally foreign to me. I'd kind of grown up with them in my house, and I'd taken that for granted, and including the idea that, to me, people with mental illnesses weren't seen as aliens or something to be feared. They were my mother's patients, and she cared very deeply about them. And I just assumed that's how everybody viewed mental illness, and it turns out that that's not the case. And that ended up becoming a big reason why I wanted to pursue this book, is I felt like, there's a big opportunity to have a conversation around how we talk about mental illness in this country.
Oh, I think that conversation needs to be had over and over and over again, because it's definitely something that our society faces, and it's kind of like, we're not really doing the best that we could in regards to people who are having mental illness or mental health issues.
Absolutely, and I think there's kind of two main audiences I wanted this book to reach, and they're the folks who've been diagnosed with something. I thought, to me, one of the powers of storytelling is that feeling of knowing you're not alone. That if it's even if it's a deceased author, and I've had this experience many times, it's like this hand from the past reaching out and saying, and there's some core human emotions, right? Like loneliness, love, we could go war, we could go on and on about the universality of some of these stories and why they stick around. So that was the big audience with this, is I wanted people to know that you could be diagnosed with a mental illness and do extraordinary things with your life. Kevin has sailed at the Olympics. He's sailed at the America's Cup. He's been married for over a decade to, a wonderful woman. He has these 3 great kids and this incredible family. And I thought that was an important story. But then the kind of group 2, which is more kind of where I'm coming at it from, are the people who are friends and family of someone with a mental illness, the people, the kind of the outsiders looking in, to understand kind of what those relationship dynamics are. How do you discuss mental illness with somebody who's going through it? How do you approach it yourself? Amanda, Kevin's wife, and I talked a lot about the caretaker-caregiver model, and how does that play out? And that's something I think is talked about less. And I think that, I've talked to a lot of people for this book, both just kind of casually and then in my interviews, and I think that we don't really have much of a language around, if someone is hospitalized, if someone is on or off medication or in or out of therapy or pursuing different kinds of treatment. And often, Kevin, he actually had testicular cancer as well, and he had these fascinating comparisons for me about how when you say you're diagnosed with cancer, obviously it's terrible. And, people will send flowers and they'll say, we're so supportive, what can we do? If you tell someone, I was hospitalized because I had a really intense episode or I had suicidal thoughts, it makes people really uncomfortable often. They don't know what to say or do. They don't know what the implications could be if you're a family member, if you're a friend, if you're an employer. And that was really intriguing to me, and I think that he made a really good point there. And that's something I hope we can change.
Well, I agree with you. I think a lot of people get so uncomfortable because they don't understand. Especially if you're talking about someone that has those thoughts, someone who's bipolar. It's like, how as a society are we treating them?
Exactly, and I think that ostracizing people isn't really the answer. And one of the things that blew me away about kind of researching this beyond Kevin's story, I felt like I needed to understand more about the history of psychiatry and psychology to kind of understand where to put him in that continuum. And I'm just a big history buff. And one of the things that blew me away is how little we actually know in terms of we don't know that much about what causes depression or bipolar disorder. We think we know stuff, but actually when you start looking at the literature and talking to folks who are really in depth in this field, we're really in our infancy of understanding how this works. And one of the things we do know is that ostracizing people isn't effective. I mean, if we were having this conversation, maybe in the 30s, 40s, or 50s, we as a society, at least in the States, decided the way we were going to deal with people who said that they had mental illnesses was to completely remove them from society, to put them into these institutions where they were way and off the streets. And now, thankfully, and the Supreme Court has enforced this, that we find that community-based models of care are far more effective, and there's more of a shift towards what's going to help the patient rather than the person labeling. And I think when you look at our prison system, for me at least, it raises a lot of questions about how are we treating folks who say or express signs of this? And time and time again, putting someone in a very chaotic environment. I mean, even if you're not dealing with issues, mental health issues, I think that would be a challenge. So I kind of tried before I sat down and wrote to zoom way, way, way out and say, where are we at with this right now? And then this is probably a whole other book, but then you get into the healthcare system, right? And the idea of who can afford to access this care, whether it's a therapist, whether it's medication, whether it's, getting even more information about that. And I think particularly in the U.S., we have, leaps and bounds to go on that front. And to me, that's a really tragic story, is the idea of somebody knowing they need help, but not knowing where they could go or how to go about it. And this isn't, The Kevin Show is not a policy book, and I think those have a place on, our bookshelves and they matter, but I really felt like to show people what that was like, I really wanted them to connect with one person and their family and their story. Kevin both of his parents were doctors. He went to Brown. He graduated, great student there. He had access to a lot, and even he had a lot of these challenges, which I think says a lot about, even when you do have a really good setup, it's still really, really hard to figure out what kind of help you need and what that looks like, and what's really going on with your mind and your body.
Well, and that can change so much, it seems, also with people that are going through different mental health issues. Sometimes, their diagnosis they could be diagnosed with something else, and so it really they have to pay such close attention to what's going on to each individual person, as opposed to, sometimes it feels like, at least with people that I know that are having mental health issues, it's just they get slapped with a diagnosis and then they're done,
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point. And I think Kevin's first episode was when he was in college, and it was in the late 80s, and at that time when he was given this diagnosis, it felt like a life sentence, and this idea was like, you will have to live with this for the rest of your life. And for some folks, and I've interviewed these people, that's true. It is something they deal with the rest of their life. But when you think about something like depression, or clinical depression, there's some research that indicates that it makes a lot of sense, right? That could be not something you're always it can have ebbs and flows. I mean, if you lose a loved one, or have something really catastrophic happen to you, it would make a lot of sense that you would have signs of clinical depression after that, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be clinically depressed for the rest of your life. So that's another example of how I just think our thinking about this could be a little bit more, or a lot more, sophisticated and empathetic. And with Kevin, we've talked a lot about his mania, and this first episode he had very messianic delusions, and one of the things that Kevin, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said to me is, why is it that when one guy does it, he's Jesus, and when I do it, I'm medicated and thrown into these facilities, and so I think that I'm just kind of trying to call into question, how are we drawing those lines? what are the purposes of these labels? How are we using them? And what effect does that have on somebody? And even when you get a label, right, and you get an in-group and you get this whole thing that comes with that, what helps you and what doesn't? And I think that's like you said, it's so individualized in a lot of cases, and it's really hard to draw generalizations, which is why, again, I wanted to focus on one person. I can't speak for every single human who's ever had a bipolar diagnosis. I think people's experiences with mental health are just as varied as their minds and who they are.
What were some of the surprising things that you discovered just in general as you were doing your research for this book?
Sure. One of the things I thought was really surprising was, again, like how little we actually know about mental health. I think I and a lot of people think, well, they wear white coats or they have PhDs. Everybody must know everything. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's naive on my part. That's not the truth in any field, really. But I think one of the other big things to me was what the reality of being an Olympic athlete is. This seems very topical as the Winter Olympians are off in Pyeongchang now, but I've covered 3 Olympics. I've written about sports, pretty closely since, probably about 2014 or so. And one of the things that you don't see on TV is the other 364 days of the year, and in the Olympics, a lifetime often, that it takes to get there. And I've always approached the Olympics and writing about sports as an outsider. I mean, I go to the gym, but I was not like a standout athlete by any stretch. And I've just never understood why somebody can train for their whole life for a moment that you get a shot at once every 4 years. It costs a lot of money. It takes an incredible amount of time. And in some sports, like say luge, your fate is determined by 1,000th of a second. And so with Kevin, I was able to kind of talk to him about what that lifestyle was like, but also what impact that has on your mind. What impact does that level of perfectionism and drive and achievement, how does that overlay with something like a mental illness? And I think particularly for men, there can be a lot of stigma in the sports community attached with talking about things like depression or mania. And, I really admire Kevin's courage in talking so candidly about his experiences, because I've had several athletes over the years tell me a lot of these things off the record and say, oh, but I wouldn't want anybody to think I was weak or to think that I was crazy. That existence, particularly in really lucrative sports like professional basketball or professional football, you have a really tiny window. The average NFL career is around 3 years, so anything you would do that could potentially rock the boat, there's a lot of fear around that. And that's another big audience I hope that the book gets, or athletes, particularly collegiate athletes who might be going through things, because it's a very unique world and set of expectations that we hoist on folks, and really have Kevin's story resonate with them.
Well, how did Kevin even get on your radar?
That's a great question. So I was covering sports at the New York Times on staff, and this would have been around 2014, and a colleague of mine, Andy Laren, who I now actually do some work with at NBC, he walked on my desk and he knew that I'd kind of carved out this micro niche of writing about kind of offbeat sports stories. And he had heard on the radio or read somewhere about this thing called Truman Show disorder. And Truman Show disorder is, kind of a casual label for the form of bipolar disorder where in your manic highs, you think you're the star of a reality TV show. So like being in the Truman Show. And he said, I heard this guy talking about this thing called Truman Show disorder, and he mentioned there was an athlete who had this, and you should look into that. So I said, oh, okay, and, kind of on a whim, I found out who Kevin was, and I found that he had recently left the sport, which I thought was really interesting, and I didn't know whether it was just that he had aged out. Sailors actually can be active for quite some time at a pretty elite level. And I just reached out on a whim, and we started talking, and I think I originally thought it was an article, and then the reporting just became really unwieldy, and before I knew it, I had tons of pages of material and stuff, and it became a book, and I'm really grateful to that. And it's funny, I just told I just told Andy recently, I was like, hey, thanks for walking by my desk. It only took me 4 years, but I finally got around to finishing up that story you mentioned.
Well, and every book is such a journey, and so when you're writing this, especially with the kind of research you did on this, I can understand it taking 4 years.
Right. Well, my first book took 5, so I think I'm getting a little bit more efficient slightly. But that's also, my first book was about the history of Monopoly, and both that and the Kevin Show, I think there's different types of writers. I think there's some people who really, really want to do books, and they really try to find those book ideas and hone them. And I'm kind of the opposite. I love newspaper and magazine work. I love, doing shorter, and by shorter, I guess I mean they're still long stories, but I wasn't somebody who dreamed of doing books. For me, books are a really great way when you have something that, becomes bigger and it kind of outgrows the space of a newspaper or magazine. It's a great way to really dig into something, and it kind of has more of like a platform. So when I realized that mental health was kind of the big underpinning of this whole thing, I thought, that really does need a lot of attention and care and a lot more pages to do that right.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting once you start diving into writing, and I'm sure you know this better than anybody. It's interesting sometimes the story will take us places where we didn't expect to go.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's so crazy to me, no pun intended, about the Kevin Show is I started it in 2014, and then you think about it coming out now, and I just feel like even the way we use technology and social media and filming each other, and then the election happened, so you have an actual reality TV star who's now the president, and all of the themes about male identity, and just, I remember around the election just feeling my head was going to spin off because all these things that I had been kind of in isolation or burrowed away writing about were just everywhere I looked. And I'm based in New York City, and there's a whole bunch of there's a lot of conversation about cameras on the street, and so I just feel like the themes of the book, which I thought were kind of eccentric and offbeat in 2014, I just pick up the paper every day, and it's like in every headline. I think whatever book you end up doing, you kind of see the world through that prism. With The Monopolist, which kind of came out of my business reporting, I remember thinking everybody's getting screwed out of their ideas. Who owns ideas in this country, and what does a monopoly really look like, and what are the implications of capitalism, and how does money move, and so it's funny because that's true. It's like this overarching plot to your life that you kind of go through your days and you do your normal things, but it's always in the back, and there's kind of a level of, I don't know if obsession is the right word, but the story has to stick with you like that, or else I don't know if it can be a book, because if it doesn't stick with you like that, what hope is there for a reader to pick it up and really connect with it if the author isn't feeling a lot of that?
Yeah, there has to be that connection, and and it's interesting when you have this passion for what you're writing, it really comes across in the pages.
That's the hope. I think that, what's the Hemingway expression, like write drunk, edit sober? I think that, I really like the editing and revision process. I really like kind of the ripping apart and, reforming things over and over and over again. I think that's how things actually become way better, and I'm very much like a creature of newsrooms, and that's what you learn in a newsroom is like someone takes a red pen and you go through it, and you go through it over and over until they take it out of your hands because the story has to ship. And I think by the time, what's funny about books is that, by the time you're through that, you're so sick of it, and then you can't touch it for like a couple of months. And in a newsroom, that's a period of maybe a few minutes or maybe overnight. So you have this window, which I'm in now, where you can't do it, you can't touch the book anymore, but it's off to the press. And like, I'm the kind of writer who I would be like on the truck with a Sharpie making changes if I could. So it's a fun process, but I think with this book more than my first, I kind of I was really anxious I think the first time you do anything is really, really hard, and The Monopolist was a much more difficult structure to crack, and it had 3 time periods. It was all over the place. The Kevin Show was a totally different kind of challenge. I kind of saw the structure really early for it, but I wanted to make sure, the themes are so much more head-spinning to me and existential and deep and psychological and intense. So it was a totally, with The Monopolist, with the exception of Ralph, a lot of the sources were deceased. So you're bringing life to people who you never met, who lived in these other time periods. With the Kevin Show, you basically I was like embedded with someone's family who was very much out and about, and it's a story that's still happening. So they were kind of good bookends to each other as reporting experiences.
Oh, I can imagine. And for our readers and listeners that are new to your work, The Monopolist was actually a New York Times bestseller.
Yes. Thank you. And it's so funny because, I think that, I don't know if you have any aspiring writers out there, but I think one of the stories that isn't told about that is, when I pitched that book, a lot of people were not interested and thought it was crazy and would say, who cares about a book about a board game, and who cares, and you've never written a book before. And then the minute it becomes a bestseller, everybody who, crapped on the idea and thought it was terrible, they're the first people who say, oh, congratulations, I knew it was going to be great all along. And so it's very useful to know who your naysayers are, and then who the people are who really help you fight for these projects. Because I can tell you that in 2009 or 10, when I was selling it, nobody thought anybody but my dad was going to buy a copy. I'm thrilled with that story getting a lot of attention, particularly Lizzie McGee, the woman who invented it.
Oh, yeah. Well, and there are probably a few more thousand people other than your dad that bought that book. Otherwise, it would have ended up on that list.
And I got to tell you, that's so surprising. It's amazing when you show up to do an event, and I still feel this way. And I hope this doesn't go away. You show up and you're like, I don't know any of these people. This is amazing. And I think that it's really important to support authors for a lot of reasons and kind of our culture around books. But it is really it's a very humbling experience, because I think we live in this era where our readers are emails, and sometimes they're really angry, nasty tweeters. But when people show up in person to support something you've written, that's a really cool feeling, and that your readers are these real human beings who now are standing across from you. And it wasn't until I did books that happened, and that was one of the coolest parts of the whole experience.
Oh, it must have been so exciting. And since we're talking about writers and readers, for those that write, I know there's always a great interest in learning, what is your writing process? I mean, especially when you've got a book like The Kevin Show that you were working on, and it takes so many years to develop. Was it something that you were writing a little bit every day, or you just get inspired and write a whole bunch at once? How does that work for you?
That's a really great question. I don't know if there's a right or wrong. It's something that, to be honest, I'm still kind of figuring out. I think what I try to do, and this is nonfiction, I don't know how novelists work, and I read a ton, but I read a ton of fiction and love it. But I cast a really, really wide net, and I try to report and report and report and report. So that's making a call list of who I need to talk to. That's doing a ton of interviews. That's reading all the books I can. I think for The Kevin Show, I probably read easily 10 to 15 books, maybe more. No, actually, definitely more than that, probably 20 or more, about various things tied to the book. And then I don't actually spend as much time writing as I think a lot of people think. I think for me, when I have a ton of facts and a ton of themes, that makes it easier when I sit down to write, because there isn't a blank page. It's actually the opposite feeling of, oh my gosh, there's so many things. But before I do that, I'm sorry, I should back up. I'm a big outliner. I use a lot of note cards, and I have to have the bones of the story kind of mapped out. And to me, that's like going in with a security blanket. You're not beholden to it, but you have a roadmap. You know where you're going. There's this trick of writing your last sentence first. I definitely do that. because I feel like I need to know where I'm driving. So I spend a ton of time reporting and outlining. And then by the time I do that, to be honest, and that's the part of the process that I think is really fun, but it's the puzzle. It's should I tell the story in chronological order? Should I move this here? Should I have more of that? Like what that balance should be. It's almost more like math than it is English, and kind of piecing together that broader framework. Then when I sit down and write, it's actually really calming because I've thought through some of the bigger things that I really want to land and stuff. So then I do that, and then I go back and read my work over and over and over again. I try to get smart people I trust to read chapters. I swap with a lot of writers too, so I'm not wasting their time. They're getting something out of it. And get feedback. And the more you can make those connections and find other writers whose work you can swap and talk with, I think that's really helpful. So by the time it ends up, in my agent or my editor's hands, it's been through many, many lives, and it's kind of like kneading bread dough, right? Like the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it, and the more it kind of rises on its own. So, and to the question about a little each day, that's totally what I do. I also am really into distance running, and I can't think about running a marathon, but I can think about running a mile at a time. So for me, I wake up in the morning, I turn my phone off, and if I get an hour or two in, great. And then I move on with my day. So I think finding a routine really helps you unlock more creative parts of your brain because you're not freaking out about the other things. And what I love about writing in the morning is nobody else needs me really then. That's my time. I'm not going to be on breaking news. So waking up early for me, that's totally worth it. And that's what I did with the Kevin Show. And, 90 minutes a day adds up. And then before you know it, you have a manuscript.
And there you go.
It's just that easy. Not at all.
No, not at all. Well, I appreciate you sharing just your thought process around that. A lot of people are always asking me, it's like, how does this, come to being? How do they get this together? And I think it inspires a lot of people to go, gosh, when we already have busier than busy schedules, you can still add writing into it.
Right, and I'm a big believer in writing, whether that's journaling, whether that's poetry, whether that's fiction. I think it's a really wonderful experience. I think it's very therapeutic for folks. I think it's a great way to organize your thoughts, to get a brain dump out. I just think it's a really critical way of thinking, and it's expressive, and we live in this era where I think, words matter, and they always have mattered, and I, hope they always will. It's funny because I also do that thing where I'll jot things down on my phone here and there, and those add up. Sometimes you have the best idea when you're shopping for groceries. So I think kind of, running around with a blank notepad is a really good habit to get into.
I use notes on my phone to do that.
Absolutely. What's the rule in photography? The best camera is the one you have closest by. I think that's true for writing. I have napkin notes for this book. I have Post-its. I have backs of receipts I've written on. I think that's a pretty common thing.
Oh. Well, Mary, where can people connect with you, learn more about all the work you do, and be part of your community?
Sure. My website's Mary-pilon, so it's M-A-R-Y, P as in pencil, I-L-O-N. That's also my Twitter handle, all that good stuff. So that's where you can find all of the things.
Oh, and it's mary-pilon.com, where people can connect with you there. Yeah, I'm part of your community. I suggest everyone do the same, and of course pick up your copy of The Kevin Show. Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. Again, if you're looking to purchase I Am Harriet Tubman or The Kevin Show, they're available at all major retailers, on Amazon, and of course at Barnes & Noble's. So we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a
single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.